So let me ask you this. Did you, I know for people that I've worked with who've had or let's say a dysregulated relationship to food, there's a good deal of shame involved in some of the behaviors, especially binge eating or certainly bulimic kinds of behaviors, right? So did you go through a period where you really struggled with yourself about whether you should come out publicly as having been a dysregulated eater?
I don't think I ever really struggled with it. It was just, it was so much who I was. I was never well, I can't say I was never a secret eater, but I remember I had a friend in college that we would binge together. And I had friends who were overeaters, are still overeaters, or chronic dieters. I mean, food was a very big issue. We were always on a diet and talking about food. And the ironic thing is, I could see them 20, 30 years later when my issues with food are really, I'm pretty comfortable, and they're still struggling with those same old issues. I'm going to go on a diet, or I just was on a diet, and they're talking about food and eating. So it's always very interesting to me, how that happens.
Yeah, so how do you explain your being able to become a normal eater?
The same way I felt about smoking and why I was able to quit smoking. I mean, I quit twice for 2 years and then resumed. But every time I took a cigarette, I thought to myself, this is killing me. It really became very uncomfortable behavior for me. And the same thing with eating. I as a therapist friend of mine says about her former addictions, she said, I knew I was never meant to be this way. And I just knew that this was not how I was going to be for life. And the most important thing is I would do anything to change the behavior. I was quite unambivalent about it. And I think that's where people get into a lot of trouble. It's what I have a book half written about that, those underlying, well, I really want to lose weight, but then I'm going to be so self-conscious and people will comment, and what happens if I get asked out, and that weight is a buffer. So I, through therapy, my reading, and my own work on myself, I resolved the underlying issues. And then I was free to just keep changing and changing and changing. And I knew if other people could do it, I could do it. It's something I find very interesting about role models. Some people will, and I know you look at role models and you've written books on them yourself. Some people will look at a role model and it be inspired, and they'll say, if they could do it, I could do it. And other people will look at the same person and say, I couldn't possibly do what they do. And they go totally the other direction into despair, and they're not inspired. And I was always inspired by other people. And I'm a pretty dogged person, as you know. That I just wanted to be healthy. And it was, it was certainly worth all the work. I can't imagine where I would be now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it siphons off so much energy to be, so compulsive and so obsessive about food, doesn't it?
All I thought about. I mean, it just ruled my day. Can you imagine even doing a diary of your life, and that's what you wrote about?
How much you eat, and how much you don't eat.
Right, and I don't. I teach the non-diet approach. I don't encourage people to count calories or count fat grams. Or it's not an external, it's an internal process of learning when you're hungry, what you want to eat, paying a lot of attention while you're eating, and then stopping when you're full and satisfied. And people, anybody can learn this. It's not easy for some, but it's learnable. I mean, let's face it, we have very malleable plastic brains, and we need to retrain them, and we can, but it's a lot of work.
So how come so many people go on diets?
Well, because diets are pushed in this culture, and we like the quick fix. We are a very external culture. If someone says it's a good idea, we go along with it rather than say to ourselves, well, gee, does this feel right? Does this work? I mean, we've both had clients who lost 100 pounds over and over again, and at that point, you'd say to yourself, this is not working. Let me try something different.
You mean they lose 100 pounds and then they gain it back,
right.
plus
And then they
probably
lose it again, and they regain it. And it's the process of dieting for biological reasons and psychological reasons that doesn't work. Now, being careful is different than being highly restrictive. And I belong to an intuitive eating group online, and one of the commenters recently said, dieting is when you eat to lose weight. And whenever that happens, it's not a good thing for the body.
Right.
You can eat less and enjoy food more, but the whole idea is satisfaction and nourishment of your body.
Yeah. And also fun, right? So for a lot of people, eating is fun. Eating, you know, tasting different things, just that whole sensory experience, right?
Yes, and if you're just enjoying food, I have friends who are foodies, but they have no eating problems. You know, they'll eat, they'll have, you know, some wonderful lobster dish and they'll leave half of it. They don't feel, you know, compulsed or compelled, right, to finish it, but they just loved it. But there's also something, people who have overeating problems, they don't have a lot of other passions. That is their main passion, and it does change, you know, their brain chemistry. You know, when we eat sugar and fats, we get that little dopamine rush, and we rush back for more, and then we get another.
Whereas, and that's why a lot of the food industries put a lot of fats and oils and salt
sugar and salt. Yeah, great book on it. Oh, I'm just forgetting his name. It will come back to me. Kessler, David Kessler, wrote a great book about it. And yes, and so it's weaning ourselves away from that and finding pleasure in other things. I mean, when I'm writing, I'm lost. You know,
You're in flow. Right.
I'm in flow. I'm in an alpha state. I'm like that when I do therapy with people. I've recently started to swim. We live in Sarasota, Florida, and I have a pool. And but other things, if I'm reading, if I'm absorbed in some other task, I know my dopamine, you know, is popping, and so that's a lot of the work I do is encouraging people to find other things that make them feel as good as eating. And that's a process too, because you can't do that externally, as you know.
Right.
You have to just let it happen and see what you're interested in.
That's right. And you also have to be observant of your inner self.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's something that you teach in, you know, your workshops and in your therapy and in your books.
Well, and they're all connected. Being observant of your inner self, how you react to situations, to doing things, do you like them or not? It's the same thing with food. You know, if you feel you know, moving farther or closer to something based on how you feel about it, and it's all internal work, as you know.
Yeah, and that's interesting the way you put it, Karen, that we're such an external, or I don't know what you'd say, externalized society, that and also, you know, we're rushing so much. So I think sometimes we don't give ourselves the opportunity to just stop, pause, breathe, and experience what's going on inside.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we're also really used to experts telling us, which of course, then we don't trust ourselves as much, because we listen to the experts, we think we failed, and then we have to go to another expert, as opposed to just sitting with ourselves and saying,
letting ourselves be the expert about our bodies.
Absolutely. Inner wisdom, inner wisdom. It always comes back to that. You can go all the way around and it always comes back.
Yeah.